Today on Newsgirls, WTF's happening at the White House.
Well, the U.S. voted against Ukraine's resolution, along with Russia. Shocking.
Elon clearly just pulled some random graph that's not even related to monthly payments. Vatican in crisis. Pope Francis was hospitalized. The papacy has been swirling in financial distress and controversial candidates.
I mean, I was one of those people he brought into his personal office.
Who do you think would be the top contenders to be the next pope?
And satellites uncover animal poaching.
You guys kind of discovered by fitting 19 elephants with GPS collars.
And so what did you see that made you think something was up?
In this case, they stopped moving. They had a collar. We're able to just go find them.
Welcome to Newsgirls. I'm Wren.
And I'm Mabel. Let's get into the stories. You know the state of the world is bad when an SNL sketch from last Saturday was basically an exact reenactment of an actual meeting that took place at the White House.
Sorry if I...
You know, you say you want to end this war, but frankly, you don't have the cards, okay? I have the cards, all right? I have skip, I have draw four, I have reverse, I have get out of jail free. The Supreme Court gave me that one.
But if I could just say...
You have been talking this entire time!
Your country's in big trouble. Wait a minute. No. You've done a lot of talking. You got to be more thankful. Because let me tell you, you don't have the cards. With us, you have the cards. But without us, you don't have any cards.
That Oval Office meeting was so shocking. I remember we were together when we first saw it, and even Republicans are appalled at the way Trump treated Zelensky, who's another democratically elected world leader.
And this meeting happened days after Trump shared the now infamous AI video of the Gaza Strip turned into an opulent resort.
Tunnels coming to set you free, bringing the light for all to see. No more tunnels, no more fear. Trump Gaza is finally here.
And watching it felt like a horrific fever dream, honestly. It starts with like a child running through rubble and ending up in this like luxurious land that looks like Dubai. And in it, you can see Trump and Netanyahu shirtless at a pool with drinks, kids dancing in money, Elon Musk eating various foods. And it's all set to this like odd song that goes, Donald Trump will set you free. Trump Gaza is finally here.
It doesn't even rhyme.
What are you talking about?
I just can't get over the bearded men in bikini tops and headscarves. Like, after all the merciless attacks on trans people and basically trying to erase them from existence.
Not a single thing in that video makes sense.
And then there was his dramatic congressional address. Like, it just seems like every day is another WTF moment coming out of the White House. So we rounded up the latest eyebrow-raising updates you may or may not have heard of.
Trump made major headlines last week after announcing that the U.S. would offer gold cards to wealthy foreigners to basically live and work in the U.S. in exchange for a $5 million fee.
Yeah, Trump said he'll start selling these in just 2 weeks and plans to sell millions as a way to reduce the U.S. deficit. It's not clear if the $5 million needs to be an investment, though, or just like a direct check to the U.S.
And this was surprising to see after the Trump administration's very hard-line stance on immigration.
Yeah, I wonder how his supporters who voted for him because of his plan to close borders feel right now.
Right, like his entire campaign was built on these promises, but clearly there are some exceptions to who he's allowing into the country. When asked if he would consider selling these gold cards to Russian oligarchs, he said,
"Yeah, possibly. Hey, I know some Russian oligarchs that are very nice people. It's possible."
Well, Commerce Secretary Howard Lutnick said this card will replace the government's EB-5 immigrant investor visa program, which does grant foreign investors visas if they add around $1 million to the U.S. to create jobs.
And the concept of residence by investment isn't new. So 30 countries currently have some kind of program like this, like Egypt, Malta, Turkey, New Zealand, even Singapore. And it was really popular in Europe in 2012 during the debt crisis when governments were trying to find a way to make money.
But a bunch of these countries have stopped their programs, like Ireland, Spain, Greece, Portugal, partly because of the fear that a two-tier immigration system that offers wealthy people preferential treatment just breeds corruption and money laundering.
Recent reporting is signaling that the holder's overseas income wouldn't be taxed, which is creating like a tax loophole shelter that has never existed in the US before and is creating a lot of controversy.
The Trump administration has taken control of the White House press pool and will now have full choice over which outlets have access to the president. Until now, the independent White House Correspondents Association oversaw press credentials, and they say this move tears at the independence of a free press.
So for some history, the press pool was created during Eisenhower to solve the problem of who gets access to the president, because obviously there are so many journalists. So the WHCA, which is actually made up of journalists, selects which reporters and photographers get access to like the Oval Office or Air Force One, and then creates a rotating schedule. So then these reporters will get their coverage and share the material with other outlets.
So far, the Trump administration has kicked out the Associated Press, Reuters, and Huffington Post, whose spot was given to Axios, and they've added conservative networks The Blaze and Newsmax, and Russian state media.
White House Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt said that the WHCA should no longer have a monopoly on organizing press pools, and that other outlets that have long been denied should have an opportunity to cover the president. And she wants to increase access for podcasters and social media influencers.
Should we apply?
It wouldn't be a WTF is going on story without some Elon headlines. So Trump held his first cabinet meeting last week, and even though Elon isn't a member of the cabinet, he did steal the spotlight in a tech support t-shirt and a black Make America Great Again hat.
If this continues, the country will become de facto bankrupt. It's not an optional thing, it is an essential thing. That's the reason I'm here. And taking a lot of flack, and getting a lot of death threats, by the way. I mean, I like to stack them up, you know.
And remember those emails Doge sent to every federal employee saying they needed to list 5 things they did in the last week or be fired? Well, at the cabinet meeting, Trump said 1 million federal employees didn't reply to those, and now they're on a firing bubble, which probably means shaky ground.
Continuing down the list of WTF Elon moments, he claimed that Social Security was a Ponzi scheme on Joe Rogan's podcast last week. He posted on X, according to the Social Security database, there are the numbers of people in each age bucket with the death field set to false. Maybe Twilight is real and there are a lot of vampires collecting Social Security.
Yeah, both Elon and Trump claim that 150-year-olds are receiving payments, but experts and economists categorically say they're misreading the records. For one, Social Security has a policy to automatically stop payments at 115, and they check to see that older recipients are still using Medicare benefits before continuing payments.
And you've probably seen this graph that Elon posted that shows even like 300-year-olds getting payments. Well, experts are saying that there are so many different databases and data sets in the Social Security Administration that Elon clearly just pulled some random graph that's not even related to monthly payments and is using it as evidence of fraud and waste, which is inaccurate and misleading.
Well, according to agency statistics, which are public, so literally anyone can go online and see them, 67 million people receive Social Security benefits, and only 0.1% are over the age of 100. So the numbers are just not adding up to what Elon's saying.
And of course, Social Security makes some improper payments and that should be evaluated, but the error is calculated at 1%, and those overpayments go to living beneficiaries, not fake dead people.
Last week, Congress narrowly passed the GOP's budget blueprint. It literally came down to one representative, but Speaker Johnson got it through. It includes more than $100 billion in new spending for immigration enforcement and the military, and raises the debt limit by $4 trillion.
And so to pay for that, the budget now requires the House Energy and Commerce Committee to find $880 billion in cuts to federal programs. And Republicans are saying that those cuts will probably come from Medicaid and food stamps, which is obviously causing a lot of outrage.
It also calls for $4.5 trillion in tax cuts, which lays the foundation to renew Trump's 2017 tax cuts, which we've known for a while the Republicans want to do. The Institute on Taxation and Economic Policy made a graph of how Trump's proposed tax plan would impact the American people, and the top 5% would get tax cuts while everyone else would get tax increases.
Yeah, and the lowest tax bracket would end up having the biggest proportional increase based off of their income. To mark the 3rd anniversary of Russia's invasion, Ukraine asked to pass a resolution at the UN General Assembly meeting, basically calling for Russia to withdraw its forces. And the resolution passed, but with way less support than in previous years, and countries actually abstained from voting because of tension caused by the US.
Well, the US voted against Ukraine's resolution, along with Russia, shocking, Israel, Hungary, North Korea, Sudan, Belarus, and others. Their rationale was that previous resolutions have failed to stop the war, but the point was just a symbolic gesture of support.
There was a lot of drama at the UN, and throughout it all, it seemed really important to the US to come off as neutral in all of this. For example, the US introduced a resolution emphasizing the importance of forward-looking solutions to the war, but then ended up not voting for its own resolution because European countries added language that called Russia an invading aggressor.
Well, experts are shocked to see such a split between how the US and Europe are framing the war now. We saw that too after Trump kicked Zelensky out of the White House, he went and met with EU leaders and was welcomed with open arms. I guess they say British Prime Minister Starmer has kind of assumed Biden's role as the chief mediator.
We've now agreed that the United Kingdom, along with France and possibly one or two others, will work with Ukraine on a plan to stop the fighting. And then we'll discuss that plan with the United States.
And as of Tuesday, the U.S. has stopped all military aid to Ukraine until Trump determines that Zelensky is making a, quote, good faith effort towards peace negotiations, according to a White House official.
The Defense Department is pausing STEM clubs for girls and pride clubs at their military schools around the world that serve 67,000 students.
According to students and DoD memos, flags of foreign countries were taken down, as well as all our welcome signs, which included a rainbow flag and a Black Lives Matter symbol. And this was a really big shock because the student bodies at these schools are very racially and ethnically diverse.
Well, groups of students for Hispanic and Asian heritage are also no longer allowed to meet, and Black History Month assemblies and performances were canceled too.
And this seems to be in line with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth's wishes to end cultural awareness months like Black History, Women's History, even Pride Month. During his first weeks on the job, he released a memo titled Identity Month's Dead at DoD.
And this is a huge shift because historically the military school system, which has some of the highest math and reading scores in the whole country, is insulated from political fights in education, just like most public schools, because they are controlled by local and state governments.
Oh no, another week where we ran out of time to talk about the important things like the AI video of Trump sucking and kissing Elon's feet that hack TV screens in federal government buildings.
So disgusting.
But Wren, this was another excuse for us to watch it.
I don't want to watch it.
There have been whispers in the Vatican about what's next for the Catholic Church since Pope Francis was hospitalized on Valentine's Day. The papacy has been swirling in financial distress and dealing with controversial candidates, so we're all waiting to see whether this is goodbye or if the Pope will make a full recovery.
So the 88-year-old pontiff was hospitalized in Rome 3 weeks ago with bronchitis, which developed into a respiratory tract infection and pneumonia in both of his lungs. And over the past days, he suffered multiple respiratory episodes that required oxygen to help him breathe.
And whenever the Pope dies, he'll be buried in a single coffin made of wood and lined with zinc, which helps preserve the body. And actually, last year, Francis rewrote and simplified the Pope's traditional funeral rites, which was a really big deal, like reducing the number of coffins popes are laid in from 3 to 1.
Francis has rejected a lot of the extravagance that comes with the papacy. Instead of the classic kingly silk cloaks and red shoes, he wears a very understated all-white cotton and wool garment.
And he chose to live at the Vatican's guest house and take meals at the communal cafeteria instead of live at the apostolic palace like most popes did. So he seems to frown at a lot of the glamour that's usually associated with being pope.
He's a real outsider at the Vatican. He took over in 2013 as the first non-European pope ever, being from Buenos Aires, Argentina.
He's also known as the most progressive pope. He told members of the Pontifical Academy of Sciences that he supported the Big Bang Theory and evolution, saying that they don't disprove the existence of God.
Yeah, that's crazy. He's also well known for accepting gay people to attend the church and even advocated for same-sex civil unions.
He's even cracked down on church corruption and excommunicated very popular members of the mafia, which even got him death threats. He also announced that priests around the world would be allowed to forgive the grave sin of abortion, which is obviously a huge step in the Catholic community.
Well, most recently, he's spoken out against mass deportations, and he has a history of meeting with refugees and visiting humanitarian crises.
He's warned the world of the dangers of climate change, expressed support for breastfeeding in public, and even denounced the death penalty. And so for all these really boundary-breaking moves and more, he was named Time Person of the Year in 2013 and even nominated for a Nobel Peace Prize in 2014.
While he's been applauded for pushing the church forward, he did stay true to one of its traditions, covering up sexual abuse. So in 2018, he faced massive backlash for appointing a bishop who was accused of hiding the sexual abuse of minors by another priest. Francis then called for an investigation which confirmed the sexual abuse claims, leading to the bishop's resignation. And the Pope acknowledged serious mistakes in his handling, saying he felt pain and shame for the crucified lives of the victims, and he hosted 3 of them at the Vatican.
But there's unfortunately more. In 2018, a grand jury report described the actions and cover-ups of over 300 predator priests and their 1,000 underage victims. A week later, the Pope acknowledged the church's failure to act and asked for forgiveness, but then an archbishop published a letter accusing the Pope himself of covering up sexual abuse reports by a cardinal in D.C. And then right after that, the Pope's own financial advisor, Cardinal George Pell, had been convicted of sexually abusing 2 13-year-old boys.
Well, he has taken actions to stop these crimes from being concealed in the future. So he abolished the rule of pontifical secrecy in matters related to sexual abuse, which basically removes the classified or confidential status.
But bringing it back to current day, the scandals aren't quite over. So recent reports have unveiled that the Vatican is going through a bit of a financial crisis. Its debt is estimated at $87 million, which is one of the largest in Vatican's history.
And 3 days before his hospitalization, Francis ordered the creation of a new high-level commission to encourage outside donations to the Vatican, which a lot of senior cardinals actually argued against because they worried it would introduce conflicts of interest to the church.
And there really aren't many ways for the Vatican, which is its own country, to make money. It's mostly through donations, tourism, and its own investment portfolio. So hopes are that the big jubilee this year, which is going to bring 32 million people to the Vatican, might offset costs, but it's not looking great, which is a problem because it means that the Vatican would have to limit its charitable works and downsize its diplomatic presence around the world.
This all begs the question, will Francis be here to oversee these changes, or will it be his successor? And who will his successor even be? I mean, some names are being floated, like Cardinal Sarah, who compared LGBTQ to ISIS and Nazism.
Oh, great. And then we have Cardinal Burke, who's actually American. He's openly pro-Trump and said Biden shouldn't get communion because he supports abortion rights. And Hungarian Cardinal Erdo that said during Europe's migration crisis that taking in refugees amounts to human trafficking.
The most progressive candidate is Cardinal Tagle, who's known as Asian Francis. He speaks a lot about helping the poor, and he supports gay, divorced, and remarried Catholics getting communion on a case-by-case basis.
To get the scoop on the candidates, details on the secret process of voting for the next pope, and just where the Catholic Church is heading, we spoke to Cecilia Gonzalez-Andrew, professor of theology at Loyola Marymount University. She's also president-elect of the Academy of Catholic Hispanic Theologians of the United States. With Pope Francis so sick in the hospital right now, can you kind of tell us what the mood is like in the Catholic community right now?
It's this joint mood, like how you would feel with a beloved relative who's sick, right? That you're really concerned and you're praying for them. But it's bigger, right? Because our world is in such a terrible state right now. And he has been such a global leader for peace and for equity and for all these amazing things. I, for one, and I know a lot of my friends do, feel like a light would go out in the world with him. When you know him personally, he's like this super approachable, warm grandfather. And then you also have to flip your head and say, and he's the leader of over 1 billion people in the world.
So let's talk about his legacy. Not saying it's over yet, but what it's been already. We know he's known for pushing the church forward in so many ways. Can you tell us about some of them?
I think one of the most important things about Pope Francis is that he has kind of pushed us back to the beginnings of the church, if that makes sense, right? We started out as this group of people ignited by this amazing vision of Jesus Christ, who really loved without any conditions, and who communicated that kind of a God. And how do we get back to that when we've had so much stuff just get in between us, 2,000 years of stuff, right? The thing that I think he will be globally, historically remembered for is his care of the earth and how he focused us on what he calls our common home, el hogar común. It's the cry of the earth and the cry of the poor. I mean, as recently as the 10th of February, he wrote a letter about the care of migrants, right? Migrants and refugees, the plight of the most vulnerable. And then, of course, the change he has made in elevating women. That has been monumental. You know, for some people, it's going to be, well, it hasn't been fast enough. But again, he's changing structures. And so he has brought into leadership women, and he has put them in positions where only cardinals used to be. And he's also engaged us as thinkers, you know, and I mean, I was one of those people he brought into his personal office to have a conversation.
We did read last year that Pope Francis changed and simplified a lot of the Pope's funeral rites. So can you tell us a little bit about the new funeral rites and what the response was in the community?
One of the original titles of the Pope is Servant of the Servants of God. Why are we doing all of this stuff that treats him like an emperor? And then even to the point of where he doesn't want to be buried at St. Peter's Square, but he wants to be buried at Santa Maria Maggiore, and it's in the middle of the neighborhood. His tomb is here in the middle of the people.
What is the Pope election process like?
I'm a woman. I'm outside of it. But the cardinals of the world who are under 80 years old, Pope Francis has actually created 95 of them. And there's 130 that are going to be in that electoral process. So they will come together in Rome, but they do go into a secret process. More than anything, it's for the quiet necessary to be able to listen to the Holy Spirit who's speaking, who is moving our hearts. They will be secreted in, you know, in the Sistine Chapel, and they will be voting in there. It normally will start about a month after a pope either resigns or passes away. They will take votes, secret votes in prayer before the image of the Last Judgment by Michelangelo. No more than 4 votes in a day.
And we have to ask, did you happen to watch the movie Conclave? Unfortunately, very timely with what's happening in the world. So there's a lot of interest in like, is this really how voting for the next pope happens? Like, how accurate do you think the movie is?
I didn't only watch it, I read the book.
Oh, amazing.
And of course, having been inside the papal palace and all that, I felt it was actually very accurate. I thought that they were very careful about following all of the protocols. One thing I would quibble maybe a little bit with the film is that the lines are drawn very clearly on political ends in the film, right? And so you've got a very, very clear liberals and very, very clear conservatives. And I think it's more nuanced than that. Even reading Pope Francis, right? He could sound as both a conservative and a liberal in one paragraph. And that's because it's the gospel. It's not an ideology. And so I think that's the place where if I had been working on the film, I would have said, let's nuance that a little bit more and show that.
So our last question for you, we've been reading some articles and seeing some rumblings. In your opinion, who do you think would be the top contenders to be the next pope?
I don't think that's something I can do, and I'll tell you why. Because it's up to the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit blows where the Holy Spirit will. I would rather think about praying that we have a next pope who will really lead the world into a new space.
I guess like knowing though the cardinals and the candidates and the runner-ups, the fact that the pope doesn't just lead like the religious way forward, but also like has such a strong like political and global stance, do you not have hopes kind of?
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. And I think that is the greatest concern for us, right? Is for me, you know, I would love to again see someone from the developing world who has had that depth of experience of being in marginal societies, who can address that and really feel it with the community. I think it needs to be someone, hopefully, who is charismatic, like Pope Francis has been, right, who can just kind of rally people around. Pope Francis loves this gesture. He likes to do this. which is to bring people together.
We know satellites are driving advancements in cell service, military strategy, and climate research, but did you know they're also integral to animal conservation?
Yeah, satellites are key to mapping changing animal habitats, which are crucial to preserving endangered animals. So, for example, satellites have actually identified large stretches of forest for tiger habitats, which have lost 93% of their historic range on Earth.
They can also document areas of deforestation and help researchers map conservation areas for high-priority animals like jaguars.
Satellites can also track individual animals to monitor their well-being, which was critical to uncovering a poaching ring, which we'll get into later.
And using satellites to track animals has been around since 1970, when NASA repurposed a fiberglass ocean buoy with a tracking device and fitted it to 2 elk, which together became known as Monique the Space Elk.
And so the tracking collars on these elk beamed their location, skin temperature, and other details to a weather satellite called Nimbus every day. And it was a groundbreaking idea at the time, but the collar cost $25,000 and weighed 23 pounds, which is so heavy and obviously outraged animal rights activists.
So in the decades since then, GPS trackers have gotten way lighter, thank goodness, and much more sophisticated.
And you might have remembered a few months ago, we aired a piece on preserving animal DNA on the moon.
The goal is to safeguard endangered species by storing their genetic material in a safe, protected place in case they go extinct on Earth.
This piece truly sounds like it was taken out of the pages of a sci-fi novel, honestly. And after that, the Smithsonian actually reached out to us about the latest in their animal satellite tracking projects. They've conserved panda habitats in China, stopped elephant poaching in Myanmar, and even reintroduced oryx, which are a type of antelope after they went extinct in the wild.
And we became fascinated by it, so today we're sitting down with Dr. Melissa Songer, who's the center head and ecologist at the Smithsonian's Conservation Ecology Center.
So to start, can you explain your job as a conservation ecologist and what work you specialize in?
So I am a landscape and movement ecologist, really specialized in larger mammals, giant pandas, Asian elephants, Schipolsky horses, scimitar horned oryx are some of the main projects. So a lot of it does involve reintroduction or rewilding of species.
We want to go through a lot of these, talk about pandas, and we understand your work entails kind of restoring habitat for pandas.
Historically, it's really been about habitat loss, reduction in changing forests into agriculture, a lot of roads and cutting through forest areas. However, in the 90s, China stopped all deforestation in the region because the roads are still there. So we have explored ways of more quickly restoring that forest to be suitable for pandas to use. And we have had luck with that, planting bamboo in areas that haven't had pandas for decades. And we've actually had pandas return to some of these areas. So really exciting.
And how are you guys using satellites to kind of help identify areas that can kind of be restored and where pandas are likely to move?
So that's a big part of it, satellite imagery. We can zero in on areas that we know where the giant pandas are, basically take a picture of the land cover, analyze that to figure out what the different habitat types are, and then we can have a time series where we see how it's changing.
Wow, that's so cool that technology can be used in this way.
It's
the benefit.
It's amazing what we can learn. Satellite imagery going back, you can get it back to the 70s, so we can see how things have changed through the years. And it used to be you would wait every 16 days. You could get a new image, but now you can get them almost every day or every other day.
Whoa.
Wow. And how hands-on is your work versus kind of more big picture and working with international governments? You said obviously this is taking place in China. So what is your role exactly?
Building partnerships with, and it's not just working with government. So often I'm working with the Ministry of Forestry or whatever the equivalent of our Fish and Wildlife Service is. Rangers, and we work with research staff of a particular protected area where we're working. And then in the case of the pandas, we also work with the breeding centers, the research and breeding centers where they have the giant pandas.
Speaking of pandas, we don't know if you had anything to do with this, but we understand 2 giant pandas were just given to the Smithsonian National Zoo.
Yes, so I am very involved in that. So I have been very busy the past. It's really been a 2-year process. It seems like they just showed up, but it's been very long and but we were successful. That's the important thing.
You can go and see them now? We can visit them?
You can go and see them. We had about a 3-month period of adjustment, and they debuted on the 24th of January. They're doing fantastic. It's actually a great time for them to arrive because it's not the warm months and they can just adjust and be happy in the cold. We renovated their habitats. They've got great outdoor spaces. And so, yeah, they seem to love it. It was very fun to see them rolling around in the snow.
Red, we should visit them.
I know. Next time we're in DC,
should.
we are.
Yeah.
We definitely are.
Let's talk about Myanmar because we understand that a lot of your work was there. So we know that there's a huge crisis there with elephant poaching that you guys kind of discovered by fitting 19 elephants with GPS collars. So can you kind of walk us through what you did and what you found?
Well, I started working in Myanmar in 2001, so a long time. And they have a really interesting situation there where they have a lot of working elephants, so elephants that work in timber. And so they don't even know exactly, but 4,000 to 6,000 working elephants. And so we began tracking them mostly in forest areas, but this specific project, when we discovered this poaching crisis, was in an area of high human-elephant conflict. And we were completely shocked to have 7 of them poached. So, we'd never had anything like that happen before. We started working with teams of rangers to go and explore. They found an additional, I think another 12 or so carcasses just in this area. Asian elephants have smaller tusks. It's about their skin, which can be used for different things.
And how did the GPS tracking work?
It's a giant collar. It's 25 pounds or so. And of course, for an elephant, that's really not very much. It's basically they're wearing a GPS. They're wearing a big battery, and that's communicating with the satellites.
And so what did you see that made you think something was up?
Well, in this case, they stopped moving. And so because they have a collar, we're able to just go find them and see that they've been, in this case, they were skinned and the skin was taken. What we started to do as a result of this was communicate with the Ministry of Forestry and try to have some enforcement and discourage the poaching. After the coup, we have not been back.
What are the rules about fitting GPS collars to animals? Do they have to be 2% or less of their body weight, or what are the rules?
That's a pretty good number that we use. A lot of times it's much less than that. In the case of an elephant or some of these larger mammals. Obviously, there are tiny animals that we also want to track, like birds, where you have to have extremely small, small. I think the smallest transmitter is something like a 1/10 of an ounce or something. The battery life is often a challenge because they just, they're carrying the battery.
Is it a disadvantage for an animal to have like a collar or a tag in any way? Like, does it slow them down if they're running away from predators, or is there like a scent to it that sets it apart from other animals?
If we're going to work on a new species, we try to test the collars. And so we can put collars on and we can actually monitor their hormones to see how stressed they are. We did a very extensive study on the scimitar horned oryx and the horses, and we did see that, once you put the collar on, their stress goes up, but it flatlines again pretty quickly. Is there any kind of a social component there? I'm really interested in that. It's not something that we've really seen evidence of either way. Like, when animal's wearing a collar, is that cool or is that embarrassing? Or, we don't really know. Really important that we are tracking them because we need to know, how they're surviving, what the threats are, how we can better manage and increase their chances for survival and maintaining or developing a population in the wild. So that's really critical information. And, we've had success. The scimitar horned oryx is a species that we worked on really from the beginning. They were completely extinct in the wild, and we were involved in, or we still are involved, but monitoring almost every single one. They have had amazing success. So, for 30 years, their status was extinct in the wild. And normally you would go extinct in the wild to critically endangered to endangered, but they actually moved to the endangered species list, which was a big upgrade.
How did your team go about making those decisions, how to reintroduce them in the wild? What considerations?
That was a coalition. I think we had 20 different organizations, and we began planning it in probably 10 years ahead of the actual release. The leader of the program is the Environmental Agency of Abu Dhabi, and they had, at the time, it was about 3,000, 4,000 oryx on big lots that they wanted to reintroduce somewhere. And there were a couple of sites that were considered, but the one where they ultimately decided to start releasing them is Central Chad. We don't want to put them somewhere where it's just going to be the same story again.
And are you still working on this project? Like, what is the ultimate goal? Like, where are the oryx now?
Right now, the plan is to continue, at least for another year, to continue to release oryx.
Are there any other projects that you think would be interesting to our audience? You might have seen I have 2 cats running around.
Oh, you're interested in cats? I don't work on any big cats. I guess the closest thing to a carnivore would be the swift fox. That's a project that is in Montana. That is a species that did not go extinct in the wild, but was extirpated through 80% of its range. So in this case, it's not captive animals that we're releasing, but we're going to other states that have them, which is great because they're already in the wild. Tracking them and, learning how well they're surviving and they're reproducing, allows us to find fins sometimes and see that, their offspring. And so it's just, I don't know, it's exciting.
Another week of Newsgirls. Thanks for tuning in.
Join us next week for a deep dive into the OpenAI whistleblower who died. We're speaking to his parents who say everything is not as it seems.
Bye.